Hello and welcome everyone for our September 2018 Teaching and Learning for Student Success monthly webinar. I just want to get started with a few reminders for how to participate for those who have joined us before, and for those who haven't, just so you know, all attendees do come to the webinar muted. So if you try to unmute yourself on your end, then you'll still be muted until I am able to unmute you. If your computer audio or your microphone is not working, you can go to the audio section of your control panel and change your audio to phone call. And that way you can just call in to be able to participate. If you want to talk to our presenter today over Q&A, you can do that. You're also welcome to type a question in during the presentation. You can just type your question into the questions pane at any time during the presentation, and I will read it for you once we get to Q&A. Again, if you want to speak to our presenter for the day directly yourself, you can do that during Q&A by using the hand raise feature, and I will unmute you so that you can ask the presenter a question. Later, after the presentation and Q&A, we will have college announcements. During that time, I will unmute everyone so that we can all participate in the conversation. But if you are driving or just in a space where there might be a lot of ambient noise, you can definitely mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon and changing it from green to orange to show that you are muted so that we can avoid any noise that might disrupt the conversation. I also just want to point out that at the bottom of your screen right now, you should see our Facebook page at Catch the Next and our Twitter handle at Catch College. We're using the hashtag TLFSSchat to continue the conversation or to participate in and continue the conversation that we're going to be having today with Dr. Dora Elias Mcallister, who will be talking to us about designing and implementing a qualitative research study. So if you want to join in that conversation, please follow us on Facebook and on Twitter, and feel free to use the TLFSSchat hashtag so that we can stay in communication and you can keep in touch with us through social media. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Dora Elias Mcallister, who will be presenting on designing and implementing qualitative research. Dr. Dora Elias Mcallister has over 15 years of college, university, and nonprofit experience. Most recently, she worked as an independent consultant, providing technical assistance, consulting, and training services to individuals and organizations in higher education. She has a particular expertise in improving projects and programs by planning, conducting, and reporting the results of program assessments and evaluations and research studies. Prior to consulting, Dr. Elias Mcallister was the Director of Grant Programs at the American Dental Education Association in Washington, D.C., where she worked with ADEA grant directors to assess, manage, and implement diversity-related grant-funded programs. Dr. Elias Mcallister is the author, co-author, or editor of several qualitative and mixed methods manuscripts, publications, and presentations on topics related to higher education, including the title is A Multi-Group Latent Growth Model of the Gender Gap in Math Achievement, Evidence from Chile. Also, the Ready Texas Qualitative Study of New Graduation Requirements, and the Student Perspective of Diversity at Academic Dental Institutions. She received her PhD in Higher Education Policy from the University of Maryland, College Park. Her dissertation utilized a qualitative case study methodology to describe and analyze the process through which a group of Mexican-American first-generation college students made decisions about whether and where to go to college. Dr. Elias Mcallister is based in Austin, Texas. In 2015, she founded Texas Higher Ed News, which is at Texas Higher Ed News on Twitter, to keep other Texas practitioners and faculty up to date on the latest information about post-secondary education in Texas. And it is my great pleasure to welcome and turn it over now to Dr. Elias Mcallister.
Okay, thank you so much. All
Thank
right, it's great to be here with you today. So, a few months ago, I read that surveys showed doubts about the value of college degrees. Now, knowing that there is academic research that contradicts this, I wondered, how did people come to believe this and why do they believe this? So I kept reading, wanting to know more, and I realized that the explanations for the findings were essentially guesses. So admittedly, they were educated guesses and some were probably true. But really, though, what the article was saying was, we don't know why the respondents answered a survey question the way they did. And so we're going to give you our best hypotheses as to what they were thinking. And here's where qualitative research would have been helpful and why it can be helpful to you. It's only by talking to people or reading what they have written that we can find out what they are thinking and as a result, understand them better and where they are coming from. So if there's something having to do with people that you've been wanting to understand, by the end of this webinar, you'll know exactly how to formulate a specific research question and how to answer that question using qualitative methods. Now, the title of this presentation is Qualitative Research and Assessment. So what is research and assessment and also evaluation for that matter? One way to easily define them, at least to me, is in terms of their goals. So research, the goal of research is to contribute to the knowledge base in a field. So for example, higher education as a whole. The goal of assessment is to improve practice of a particular discipline. So maybe you want to provide information to your campus about learning outcomes for your students. And the goal of evaluation is to assess the worth or value of something. And that something could be a program, a process, or a technique. For all of these, you're going to be systematically investigating something, but exactly what you're doing depends on why you're doing it. Today, I'm going to mostly use the word research, and that's really just to keep it simple. But know that most of what I say could easily apply to qualitative assessment or evaluation. Let me also do some debunking. I think people have misconceptions about qualitative research because they don't understand it. Here are just a few common misconceptions that keep people from doing qualitative research. These are just 3 out of the 10 that Sean Harper and George Koo present in their great article, and I highly recommend that you read up on all 10, especially if you're on the fence about qualitative research. First, qualitative data are easy to collect and analyze. Anyone can do it, right? You just write down some questions, you find some people to interview, and you press record. So if it's that easy, then qualitative research must not be real research. But qualitative research is so much more than that. It's rigorous, it's an intentional process, it has steps you have to follow, and if you don't do it well, you're going to produce data that no one can trust. But still, I mean, really, it is true that anyone can do qualitative research in the same way that anyone can do quantitative research. But in order to do any type of research, you need training. And the first step for some of you in learning to do qualitative research might be this webinar. And you're going to get some good tips and some insights, some practical information, but you're also going to need some further training, and I'll tell you about some additional resources at the end. 2, qualitative methods are too labor-intensive and cumbersome to be practical. This also has an element of truth to it. Implementing a qualitative study, especially if you're collecting the data yourself, can take a lot of time. It can be difficult and it can be complicated. So for your first qualitative project, you might want to think about partnering with someone else, maybe another Catch the Next faculty or institutional administrators, maybe even with students. You can partner with one other person to design and implement, or you might even consider a small research team depending on your goals. It may still take longer than if you just distributed and collected surveys and then analyzed them using stats software, but it'll make your process will be more efficient than if you did it yourself. 3, only assessment findings that are generalizable can inform policy and practice. It's unrealistic to assume that assessment data in any form, quantitative or qualitative, is going to hold for all students at one school or for any student at any school. Also, what is happening to individual students should be of concern to educators and administrators. But that being said, sometimes you do need to be concerned with the extent to which your qualitative findings can be applied to other situations. And in that case, there are strategies that you can use to enhance the possibility of generalizability. So I just introduced you to what qualitative research isn't. So what exactly is it? The term qualitative research has a lot of definitions because it's a complex type of research. One way to define it is to talk about what kinds of things you do in this type of research. This definition, which you can read for yourself there, tells you that qualitative researchers study things in their natural settings. So we don't set up experiments, and we attempt to interpret things that naturally occur, not by how often they occur, but in terms of how the people in these settings define, explain, or interpret them. Another way to define qualitative research is in terms of its characteristics. Again, qualitative researchers are interested in how people interpret their experiences, how they construct their world, what meanings they attribute to their experience. The key concern is understanding from the participant's point of view, not your own. Also, you're going to be describing a process rather than the result or outcome of that process. So for example, I worked on a study where an organization wanted to know how high school students chose endorsements. When I designed the focus group questions, I purposely did not include a definition or an explanation of endorsements in the questions because it was crucial to understand what they thought endorsements were and how they came to think this, and not whether they knew the Texas Education Agency's definition of endorsements. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You're the one collecting the data and analyzing it, and this is why training is so important. Another characteristic is that it's usually, though not always, an inductive process. This means that you gather data to build concepts, hypotheses, or theories, and not to deductively test hypotheses, concepts, or theories the way you might if you were doing an experiment. And I say not always because for my dissertation, for example, I found patterns, themes, and categories that emerged from the data, but I also used a conceptual model of student college choice for analyzing the data. And then finally, the product of qualitative research is richly descriptive. You use words and maybe pictures instead of numbers to communicate what you have learned about something. These are the most common types of qualitative research. Today, I'm talking about your basic qualitative study, because this is usually the type of study done in education. But there are other types, and each has a different way of asking research questions, selecting a sample of participants, collecting and analyzing data, and writing up the results. For example, I'm most familiar with a case study. In case study research, you limit your study in some sort of way, and you collect data through multiple sources of information. For example, maybe you're interested in college student mentoring and coaching in general, and you decide that you're going to do a case study and you're going to explore this issue by interviewing Catch the Next students on your specific campus and by reviewing the Catch the Next website to see what information or what messaging they have about mentoring. To get an overview about the other types of qualitative research, really all the types of qualitative research, almost all of the books that I included in the qualitative research bibliography, that's the handout for today, will be helpful. So here it is, your 5-point plan for designing a research study. This list makes it seem like it's a step-by-step process, but in qualitative research, some of these processes are concurrent and they're more or less completed at the same time. There can also be a lot of going back and forth between them. So how do you select a topic for qualitative research? Most important, it has to be a topic that you are genuinely interested in because you are going to spend a lot of time with it. In education, a lot of studies are what some people derisively refer to as me-search, because the researcher chose a topic that they have personal experience with. But there is nothing wrong with generating a topic from your daily life. For example, from your experiences with Catch the Next. Just because you have practical personal experience with something, it doesn't mean that you aren't going to produce research that others in education will find interesting and valuable. But you can also generate a topic from previous research. Sometimes when you're reading a journal article, you see a section called Suggestions for Future Research. You can be the one to do that research. But it also might come from a popular education theory. Maybe that popular theory doesn't seem to apply to your experience. This could be your research problem. This, in my experience, is the hardest part of research, of designing research. It answers the question, why is your study needed? And typically the research problem is presented in the form of a statement, and it goes something like this. Although we know A, B, and C about this topic, we don't know D, E, or F. And this is why you need my study. So for example, here's the problem statement for an article that I worked on with a research team, by the way. Most research on the effect of K-12 STEM teachers on students examines teacher effect on student learning outcomes and scores on assessment tests. However, we know far less about the long-term impact of students' interactions with K-12 teachers and their pursuit of math and science majors and careers. The contribution of this work is that it identifies and describes some of the long-term implications and benefits of interactions with K-12 teachers. Now, the research problem is going to reflect your theoretical framework. A theoretical, sometimes called a conceptual framework, is the underlying structure, scaffolding, or frame of your study. It's one or more concepts, models, or theories that support how you understand and plan to research your topic. And it also provides the terms and definitions that are relevant to your topic. Now, some qualitative researchers are going to tell you that because qualitative research is designed to build rather than to test theory, that you don't need a theoretical framework. And that's why I italicize this step, because you won't see a theoretical framework explicitly, at least, in every study. But I think that including a theoretical framework is important in large part because it provides a rationale for the way you're approaching the research problem and answering your research questions. And it shows that you've done a thorough review of the literature, because this is how you identify and establish the theoretical or conceptual framework. But besides providing the theoretical framework, reviewing the literature helps you shape your research problem and in making other decisions related to designing and carrying out your study. By reading what others have done, you can save yourself a lot of time if you know, for example, what concepts, models, or theories others have used, how they have defined key terms, what data collection techniques they use successfully, or what data collection techniques they tried that weren't successful, because that happens too. Now, I do want you to know that there are some types of qualitative research that advise waiting until data analysis or later to review the literature, but most qualitative researchers consult the literature early during the research design. Also, doing a literature review is especially important if you want to contribute to the knowledge base in a field or do a research study as opposed to an assessment or an evaluation. When you read reports of research in academic journals, you will always see references to the literature. The last step, if you will, before you actually get to do your study is choosing who or what you are going to select for inclusion in the study. If you were doing a quantitative study, you might use probability sample, which usually involves random selection. But in qualitative research, you use non-probability sampling, which relies on the subjective judgment of the researcher. You select what in qualitative research is called an information-rich sample, and who and or what you include depends on the research problem. Think of it this way. Say you need to bring in consultants to your campus to help you solve some kind of problem that you're having, something that you need to figure out. You're not going to bring in random consultants. You're going to choose specific consultants because of their particular expertise. You bring in the consultants that you think are going to be the most helpful to you. Here are the 3 ways that data is commonly collected in qualitative research. Now, more and more researchers are using online data sources such as posts and discussions on social media sites, but since many of these newer data sources are really just versions of these 3 basic ways to collect data, I'm going to talk about these 3 here. If you decide that interviews are best for your study, you likely want to go with the most common type of interview in qualitative research, and that's a semi-structured interview. This will work with individual or type of interview is guided by a set of questions and issues you want to explore, but it's just that, it's a guide. You're not asking each interviewee the exact same questions in the exact same order. Your focus is the specific information that you're looking for, but during the interview, you will also respond to what your participant is telling you. Maybe they bring up something that you never thought about, and you think it might be important, so you want to know more about it. You wouldn't just ignore what they said because it wasn't on your list of questions and issues. But regardless of what questions you ask or what order you ask them in, the critical part here is asking good questions that are going to get you meaningful data. Observation is the best technique to use when an activity, event, or situation can be observed firsthand, when you need a fresh or new perspective on something, or when participants aren't able or willing to discuss the topic under study. If you're interested in this technique, you might want to read this new book that I've been hearing about called White Kids by Margaret Hagerman. To examine how white children learn about race, she spent 2 years observing children doing homework, playing video games, and just going about their days. Another study that drew on in-depth observation is detailed in Annette LaRose's book, Unequal Childhoods, and both of these books include a methodology section that will tell you a lot about how they went about doing their study. Now, documents and artifacts, those are essentially refers to anything that's not an interview or an observation. Some of these documents can be generated at the researcher's request. For example, you might ask your participants to keep a diary or to take photos, but most of what you'll use are pre-existing documents. What makes these documents or artifacts valuable, the ones that you select, is that they contain information relevant to your research questions. This, for example, is where if you have quantitative data, such as survey results, you can include it in support of your qualitative study. The last thing I want to say about collecting qualitative data is that you don't pick the technique that most appeals to you. The data collection techniques that you use are going to be determined by your theoretical framework, by your research problem, and by the sample that you select. The first time that I sat with pages and pages of transcripts from interviews and documents I collected or created, this is pretty much what it felt like. It was a little overwhelming, but I got through it 1 page at a time, and you will too. Though for your first study, you might want to start out with something smaller. The goal of data analysis and qualitative research is to find answers to your research questions. These answers are called categories or themes or findings. Essentially, what you'll be doing is taking pieces of information in your data, for example, words or sentences or paragraphs that might help you answer your research questions and sort those pieces of information into categories. And I'm giving you an interviews example here. It would be different for observation or documents. Now, this process of identifying information that might be helpful is called coding. And assigning codes to pieces of data is the way that you begin to construct categories. You can code your data by hand. You print everything out like here and just do that, take notes on there, highlighters, tabs, all kinds of things you can use, or you can use a computer software program. The ones that I'm most familiar with are NVivo and the Deuce. And NVivo is spelled N-V-I-V-O, and the Deuce is spelled D-E-D-O-O-S-E. There are different possible levels of data analysis. You can stop at classifying data into categories or themes, or you could take it up a notch, if you will, and develop a model or generate theory. Also, the different types of qualitative research each have their particular data analysis strategies. I can't explain to you exactly how to analyze qualitative data because it can be difficult to understand until you're actually doing it. So instead, I recommend that you approach the data analysis part of your research the same way that most researchers do, and that's by reading about data analysis and getting help from someone that's experienced with qualitative data analysis. The next time that I talk to you is going to be in May, which is 8 months from now. That timing is intentional because Catch the Next wants you to use this time to think about, plan, and implement a study that comes from your personal experience with the program. And they're hoping that by May, you will be ready to write up your findings. One of the things that I like about qualitative research is that even if study information is never widely circulated, the process and the findings can be extremely valuable to the researcher and the participants. At the same time, if others in the program or your campus or education as a whole might benefit from what you learn, why not share your findings? And today I'll touch on determining the audience for your write-up, selecting a focus, and where you want to you might want to share your findings, because different audiences and places to share your findings will be interested in different questions and components of your study. And I'll also talk about the common sections of a qualitative study write-up. At the beginning of the presentation, I said that the first step for some of you in learning to do qualitative research might be this webinar. And I hope that you've gotten some good tips, some insights, and practical information. But again, you're also going to need some further training. So I put together a bibliography for you, and I think that's available as a handout already. I made sure that I chose resources that I or others have found to be accessible, practical, and that provides lots of concrete examples. Also, this PowerPoint has references that you'll be able to see when you download it. They're in the notes sections of the slides. If you're feeling like you don't know where to begin, you can also contact me to learn more about qualitative research in general, discuss your idea for a research study, or learn about how I can partner with you to get you the knowledge and skills that you need and to help you meet your research study goals and deadlines. My contact information will be on the next slide. You can feel free to call or email me, or just send me a 30-minute phone call calendar invite. Lydia, can you talk about some of the Catch the Next resources?
Absolutely. So, and thank you so much, Dora. This has been great. So one of the reasons why we thought it would be nice to have Dora present on qualitative research in this two-part series that she's going to be doing is for a couple of reasons. One is that we keep hearing and we keep finding over and over again that in the research on higher education, especially on pedagogy, very seldom do we actually hear the voices of teachers. So we want to make sure that, you know, faculty who are participating in our program have the resources that you need to conduct and publish a study of your teaching practices or your student success. You know, should you want to do that, should you want to take that opportunity. So one of the venues for publication that we actually have created in response to kind of the demand for teachers' voices is our Journal of Ideas and Pedagogy. And once we wrap up and we're going through the announcements, I'll show you where you can find that on the Catch the Next website. So we have that Journal of Ideas in Pedagogy. The publication cycle, the submission cycle for that is starting to come to a close. So we do accept rolling submissions year round. But for publication in the next issue, we really need submissions by mid-November, so around November 15th. So we have that as a resource. Catch the Next also has a knowledge development working group, and I don't see her on the webinar right now, but our Director of Research and Evaluation is Dr. Aaron Doran, who has published widely about Catch the Next, and who also is a whiz with all things IRB. So if you are interested in interviewing your students or, in any way sort of using your students' voices as aspects of your research or your qualitative study, then you most likely will need to get IRB approval probably from your institution. Erin is at Iowa State University, but she has gone through the whole IRB process for a couple of colleges that are in our network, as well as for Iowa State. So she can also, and she has offered previously to sort of help walk us through those processes, and even to partner with some of us so that we could kind of just get under her IRB that she already has to be covered by that. So we have a lot of resources. You can always contact me if you want me to put you in touch with any of these people. I'm also the one who you would contact if you are interested in submitting to the journal. But yeah, and we also have a blog. So if you wanted to start kind of a little bit more low stakes than the journal, which does use a full double-blind peer review process, we have a blog on the website as well, and our Director of Professional Development, Allegra Villarreal, oversees that. So you can also contact her about writing for our blog as well.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions?
So I appreciated that you recommended a couple of books. Can you say again who was the author of White Kids?
Yes, her name is Margaret Hagerman. It's Hagerman. She is a sociologist. I can't remember at what university she's in, but she just released her book not too long ago. And I know that you don't want people taking 2 years to observe, right, before they do something for Catch the Next. But it's really fascinating. And again, I think what's important about these books is that methodology section where they really talk about a lot of the ins and outs of doing this type of work. And also something that I didn't mention is that typically in qualitative research, things like documents and artifacts and observations are complement or additional sources of information to complement the interviews that you're doing. So it's, and which is the same case for these two books. Yes, they did observations, but they were also interviewing children and also parents.
Okay, that's good to know. So the interviews should be sort of the central piece.
Usually it helps. And again, there's other people that are going to have a different approach to qualitative research, but I approach it in the sense that I think it's important to have multiple sources of information, because then you can point to one source of data, and then you can say, and I also have this other data that backs up what people were saying in the interviews. And that's just something that makes me feel more confident about my findings. And I think that it's not necessary, but also especially for journals and even the average person, if you show them multiple sources of information, they will likely trust your findings more than if you just quote unquote did interviews. But that's a personal preference. Other people might feel otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Um, and I did want to, Dora had mentioned a couple of times the handout. So if you look at your control panel, you'll see a section called handouts, and it should say 1 of 5. If you can click on that where it says CTN webinar resources, it's a PDF file that it should open up in your browser and you can download it. But we'll also make sure that this handout and Dr. Elias Mcallister's slides are available to you along with the recording of the webinar. So as I'm looking, Dora, at your bibliography here, one of the things I'm thinking is, when it comes to getting started on research, I tend to put off writing or doing some of the heavy lifting by reading excessively. And I think that I can see myself maybe, putting so much emphasis on learning how to do qualitative studies by reading, several of these works before ever actually getting started on it. So I'm wondering, at what point would you say, because you did say, it also takes training. So at what point would you say someone would know that they're ready to start?
Well, I strongly recommend that you that if you've never done qualitative research, that you partner with someone. Now, for those of us that are able to learn it in a classroom setting the way I did, you do your reading, you go into the classroom and you discuss it, and then you have assignments that help you practice what's in the book, right? So I might have an assignment where I do an interview, I code it, I turn that into the professor, and then they give me feedback on that. Well, some people don't have that option, and maybe don't want that option. That's fine too. And so you need to set up, I think, something similar. You need to do some reading, but you also need to partner with someone that already knows how to do qualitative research so that they can walk you through the process. I think that most of the books that I included in here are a very general overview. So I think the one that I used that guided me through my dissertation is Merriam's Qualitative Research book. That's the one that I used that I really like. So I'm going to recommend that one, maybe to start with. But I really think you pick one book, and then you need to find someone that knows how to do this, that is able to guide you through that process. I really think that's the best way to do it. Does that answer your question?
It really does. Yeah, thank you. That's great advice. And I would like to hear from our attendees if anyone has any ideas for a qualitative study that they are considering right now. And while folks are kind of thinking about that, I just wanted to say that, one of the other resources that Catch the Next offers is our peer mentoring program. So we have a large body of scholar mentors specifically who are very practiced with qualitative and quantitative research and from a wide variety of fields. So if you are interested in partnering with someone, you might just go take a look at our list of scholar mentors that's up on our website. And see if there's anybody whose research is kind of in line with what you might be thinking about, a project that you might be interested in doing. So let's see, does anybody have any ideas for a qualitative research study that you've been thinking about, or you've kind of thought, I want to do this, but I don't know where to start? Or are you familiar enough with research from your field that you would like to, what would you like to see? What isn't being done yet? What isn't being discussed that you would like to see people talk about more? And actually, while people are thinking about that, I'll turn that question to you, Dora. What is out there right now that you would like to see more discussion about?
Well, Something that I thought of when you were speaking was that the examples that I gave were about students, right? Students and their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're interested in faculty and pedagogy, then think about a research project that's focused on the faculty. So perhaps you're not interviewing students or observing students, you're actually observing other faculty, which also would require IRB. I think that's what you were
Mm-hmm.
mentioning in those programs. I think what I would like to see, which you don't see as well, at least in what I read, right? I'm not reading on pedagogy because I'm not an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would like to see is the specifically what it is that faculty are doing in the classroom that is helping them, that is helping students be successful. And you can look at it that from different ways, either be successful in the classroom or in the transfer process. We know that so few students in some instances are transferring, and that would be interesting for me to see the effect of the student. I know that Dr. Laura Rendon has done some work around validation theory and faculty, and maybe seeing that theory applied specifically to the work that is being done by catch the next instructors might be something that would be interesting to see. And then I also like, not everyone likes this approach, but I started with the example at the beginning of having the quantitative data, and I know at the it's the summit, right? The summer summit.
Mm-hmm.
There was some quantitative data that was presented. I would be interested in seeing qualitative data that complements the quantitative data that Catch the Next has. There's a lot of programs out there, and I'll wrap this up, but there's a lot of college success, access and success programs out there that are not being assessed. I think describing the experiences of students or participants, and whether that's students or anyone else, is important, but I don't think that we're seeing enough assessment and evaluation work. And I think that if you did that for Catch the Next specifically, that would also inform other college access and success programs. That's something that I really would like to see. I think that's a key piece. The other things are interesting, but I think this is a key piece that's missing in the literature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so assessing what's working and then sort of, I guess, evaluating the impact.
Yeah, I mean, that's one option, but you don't necessarily, so assessment might just be one piece of the program. So for example, if you have this data and you know that students are being successful, but your next step might be why? What exactly is it about the program? And you have anecdotal evidence, but you also have survey results. So maybe you look at that and what are students saying about the program or participants, and then you can really have it be research-based to say, look, this is the data that tells you why we're successful or how we're successful.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, thank you so much for those suggestions. So, if there are not any further questions, we can move on to the college announcements. And thank you so much, Dora. I also, just personally want to say how much I appreciate your offer to consult with the attendees here today and some of our practitioners. I might personally take you up on that. So
that would be great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.